couple of things. We're talking about Maria. There she is. She's on dialysis. You all recognise her on your own dialysis units. Isn't that what dialysis looks like now? That was Charing Cross in 1976. But it is Charing Cross, and it's 1976 isn't very long ago. But we're talking about Maria on dialysis.
Microphone.
But just to put it in context, you were all alive when these devices were around.
No microphone.
And actually that was in 1996, and that was when the company TomTom began. And they released some mapping only for those two devices. So it didn't do any graphics, it just had a sort of a rather odd map that was on your Palm Pilot or on your Nokia in 1996. Okay? Within 5 years, they'd released what everybody then had in their car, which was a satellite mapping tool. Within 5 years. So just bear that time scale in mind when we're thinking about what artificial intelligence might do. That wasn't just about artificial intelligence, it was about technology. But these time scales are going to be very, very rapid. So why will it improve patients' lives? So I'm going to persuade you, I think, in a number of areas in the next 15 minutes or so, 10 minutes. I think it's going to improve patients for their diagnostic and especially for imaging. It's going to improve their prognosis and their progress through dialysis, because I think we can use much more of the data that we currently collect, most of which we never use. We do monthly bloods on all our patients on hemodialysis and a little bit less frequently on PD, and we do bugger all with that data, but maybe look at the hemoglobin and the ferritin and not a lot else. I'm going to tell you about some technologies which could come in within the next few months, which will save lives by using AI, and things like diet we'll talk about, and then treatments. So I think there are a whole host of areas where it's going to work. This is not about replacing you or me, it's about supporting healthcare professionals to improve the care. Okay? This is augmenting. This is actually the major thing it's going to do, as well as provide better care, is it going to allow individualization, which we'll touch on with things like diet, and it's going to release time for you to talk to your patients more, explain things, allow them to make decisions. And that's what it's going to do, which will improve their lives and your lives. Let's touch on a number of those things. There's a prize in the next 10 seconds if you can identify all the 10 films that those bits of AI were being used in. I'll give you 10 seconds to have a quick think. Does anyone think they can get all 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Maybe 9. And can anybody get that? This is the most important one, actually. And only David will get this one, I think. Yeah, so no, I mean, think you'll know what that one is. That is the most important one. 2001 Space Odyssey. It's HAL. HAL was the computer in 2001. If you haven't seen the film, it's a fantastic film. It's very old. You're all young to see it. But this was the first really good AI computer in film. Anyway, that's irrelevant. What do we mean by artificial intelligence? We mean clearly that machines can learn new experiences, or from new experiences, to perform tasks. But we are not talking, we are decades away from a machine doing what you and I can do, which is multiple complex interactions. We are talking about narrow artificial intelligence, a specific task that a machine can do. Image analysis, for example, or detect your potassium from an ECG. It can't also tell whether you're infected. So we are talking about narrow but artificial intelligence. And general AI, what you and I do continuously, is worlds away. And this is all based, the language doesn't really matter, but it's about the machine learning and about how you program the machine to learn. And I just thought I'd set this up. You can teach a machine to learn what a picture of a cat is, but actually that's not easy. You and I can recognise cats instantly, but the reality of teaching a computer to recognise that all of those are cats is not easy. And you might get it to think about the fact there's fur and whiskers and claws and it's got 2 ears at a rather specific angle, but a network of things in a black box will do that for you. But that's what machine learning and artificial intelligence is doing. You are feeding it in inputs. Here's a set of images of patients on dialysis. You're telling it initially what some of them mean, and then you're letting it learn how to get them answered. So let's give you some specific examples. you can all recognise that this is a chest x-ray, this is a dialysis patient who happens to have a pacemaker and his chest x-ray. But before we go down this route, let me remind you that consultant radiologists get it wrong 30% of the time. So we don't have to do much better with AI. On x-rays and scans, radiologists who are expert miss things 30% of the time. Data not from 2000, from recent. So let's go back to this patient. So this is one of your dialysis patients, okay? Fred, and he's got a pacemaker and he collapses outside the hospital, he gets brought in, and the A&E department want to know if the pacemaker is working or not. They take an x-ray, and he's unconscious. How on earth do they know what that pacemaker is? He's carrying nothing on him, it was put in 5 years ago, but it makes a difference to knowing whether they can switch it on or switch it off, or if they can interrogate it with a little bit of technology. They have no idea. Would Fred's wife know what model it was? Of course not. I can tell you that if you took a close-up, it's an AT500 in the top left-hand corner, but here's just 4 random chest x-ray pacemakers. How on earth can you identify what they all are? There are hundreds of models of pacemakers. So an expert cardiac electrophysiologist, the man or woman who puts the pacemaker in, using a complicated process with pieces of paper and lots of photographs, might get it right most of the time or some of the time. So James Howard, who's a PhD student at Imperial, thought this was a really solvable problem. So he programmed a neural network in his spare time. Cardiology registrar, because he actually did this before his PhD, to do it, to identify the pacemaker just from the chest x-ray. So he fed it in 5,000 x-rays where he knew the pacemaker and he got it to learn. And this is what he showed. Now at any blind x-ray, it will get it right 98% of the time. Consultant cardiologists just about hit 70%. Specialist electrophysiologists get about 80%. So AI is helping Fred, your dialysis patient, when he collapsed on the street, by identifying his pacemaker. And you just drag his x-ray on a web platform onto that picture and it tells you the model of the pacemaker. This exists today. The programming was done 6 months ago. That's all it's taken, and it's free, it's on there for anybody to use. And, which I'll come to the very end, anybody in the world. They can be in Sri Lanka. So this is allowing high quality healthcare anywhere in the world. You don't need a cardiac electrophysiologist anymore in Sri Lanka to identify it. And most of this literature is all very recent. This is moving so fast. Here you are, this is just a bit more. This is about identifying anything major on a chest x-ray. So how many of you think that chest x-ray is normal or abnormal? I'll give you 10 seconds to look at that, and you have got to vote. It's either normal or abnormal. Hands up if it's normal. A few of you. How many it's abnormal? Lots more of you. How many of you think I wouldn't have shown it to you if it was that? So let me pick on you. Where's it abnormal? So, that paper I just showed you took 25,000 x-rays and the CT scans and it taught a program to identify it. 15 consultant radiologists all said that was normal. They could not see an abnormality on it. That's the abnormality, a bit of shadowing, very soft shadowing in that left mid-zone. That's what the AI program chose. It embedded the chest X just as a blue, and it didn't have a high probability. It said, I think there's a 30% chance there's an abnormality there. But that's enough for the radiology to go back and have another look at it. And when you do that, actually on second look, a few more, but only 7 observers correctly got it right. Okay? And the abnormality on a CT scan was a patch of pneumonia in that bit of lung, just there. So the AI is outperforming for your dialysis patient on a routine X-ray. Here's just another example. This was missed. This minor abnormality down here was only picked up by 2 radiologists. It's clearly visible on the CT that the patient didn't necessarily need, and the AI knew that there was something there, and it allowed a second look by radiologists, all the CT scans to be done. Surely that's improving lives. There is very nice data in mammography that you can eliminate the need of a second reader and save 30% of radiologists' time from mammograms, which are a boring job to do. Spend all your life looking at x-rays of breasts. If you multiply that in the UK, we think you might save almost 900,000 hours. So the radiologist, rather than rushing in and doing a scan they need to do on your dialysis patient, could talk to them a bit more about what it means. You're not firing people, you're creating time for more important conversations. So that works for imaging. I'm going to show you 2 bits of information. It seems to work for dermatology, it works for eyes. So the eyes is very good. And why not do this at home? For skin lesions, patients could photograph their skin lesion, send it into an AI program that might not give a complete diagnosis, but might say, is this worrying or not worrying, for example. And in dermatology, this works very well. The best and most recent, biggest study showed that dermatologists got a correct diagnosis 19 out of 30 of randomly selected cases out of tens of thousands of skin lesions. The best AI gets it right 25 out of 30 times. So AI outperforms dermatologists for identifying malignant and non-malignant skin lesions. And in ophthalmology, particularly diabetes, and most of your patients, or lots of your patients are diabetic, AI is really good at identifying diabetic retinopathy. Sensitivities and specificities that are hugely good for saying whether or not there is diabetic retinopathy and therefore whether it might need laser treatment. AI will save your dialysis patient's sight. That's improving their life, isn't it? And if you didn't have AI, of course, ophthalmologists might do this, but there's a wait because they take so long because there are not very many ophthalmologists. What's really interesting, and this study first showed it, is that AI can do things we never predicted. So, for example, from this study, they actually found that the AI could work out a cardiovascular risk score from the retinal photograph that was much better than just using cholesterol, smoking and blood pressure in predicting future cardiovascular events. But it's not quite clear how it did it. And even more surprisingly, it could predict your gender. So if you show any ophthalmologist a retinal photograph, they have a 50% chance of knowing if you're a man or a woman. They are no better than you or I. It's random. The AI got this right 98% of the time, and we still do not know what the program is looking at, and it's irrelevant. It's not matter. You know whether somebody's a man or a woman. But what it tells us is that AI can do much more with data than we are anticipating. Let's move on a bit. And this is a really interesting story as well. So the Apple Watch, some of you may have bought the most recent version. It records your ECG now, based on a technology called a live call, which is a separate company, but Apple has developed the same thing. But what they've now shown is that that continuous tracing of an ECG will allow identification of hyperkalemia. So when that work was done by academics sitting at various universities in the States, they initially, with hundreds of thousands of ECGs, fed in the T wave. You all know that if you've got high potassium, the T wave becomes abnormal. And the AI couldn't really make any head of it. It said, sure, if the T's are really big, you've got high potassium, but other than that, wasn't very good. So they thought they'd lost the boat. It wasn't helping. So they ignored that narrowing and said, let's give it the whole ECG. And lo and behold, the AI said, actually, I'm not interested in the T wave at all. It turns out that small changes in blood potassium affect other bits of the ECG that were not known to us before. And this tracing of the AI that does it can detect potassiums of over 5.5 and that are climbing reliably and repeatedly. And how many of our patients probably die at home from hyperkalemia? Sudden cardiac death in the absence of ischemic heart disease is the commonest cause of death of your dialysis patients. Why aren't we giving them all a watch that monitors their potassium?
Right.
Oh, you're not. It only costs 300 quid. One dialysis session costs 300 quid.
Yeah. 500.
Okay, so this is a very version now, but it's where we're at. And this is all the science that shows you this works reliably.
Pero kung NHS yung sa out,
And there are other tools. So this was a different model that came out, a Withings watch that does the same thing. So it's not just Apple,
mas mura
lots of
pero
companies are going to be doing. And the FDA was so impressed by this, it labelled it a breakthrough device, which allows the company to get special funding and allow it to be used in patient circles because the FDA was so impressed by the technology. David's leaving now. And then technology isn't just the hardware, so this is the latest blood pressure watch. We used to think wrist blood pressures were hopeless because of stiff blood vessels towards the wrist and all sorts of things. So this is a watch that has an inflatable cuff inside the wristband. It does inflate
Nice.
but has shown actually
I think
to
I
be
might need
reliable
to
and
buy it for
repeatable
my
and a
mom.
very accurate measurement of, but as a watch. So this isn't something you have to stop and plug in an Omron on your upper arm. You could have blood pressure monitoring much more conveniently through your life, surely. And it's not the hardware, this is the AI that's made this work. Last two things really, how about big data? So this is where AI can look at huge amounts of data and try and make a bit more sense, particularly of trends over time. So I just think the classic example is big data. We collect all these bloods on all our dialysis patients, and what do? We do look at the hemoglobins and adjust the EPO. And we do it badly because actually how Edwin does it at Charing Cross and how I might do it might be slightly different. He's reduced the EPO by 1,000 units, I've reduced it by 2,000. We laugh and we joke and we toss a coin. But we ignore the serial sodiums and the serial ureas. And we saw all those, why are we ignoring it? We don't know how to handle it. So there's an opportunity here that isn't yet met for AI to say, well, maybe trends are useful. A slowly sinking albumin that we miss, indicating malnutrition. But this is being used. So Fresenius are doing two things. So they've built AI into two models. The one was trying to predict acute admission. So they used AI to look at biochemistry in all their patients in their hemodialysis units and to look at a number of other factors. And they've shown in preliminary data that using AI on serial measures reduced the admission rates of patients in units using this by 23%. In hemodialysis patients, routinely having AI look at routinely collected data. That would benefit your patients, wouldn't it? And then this lovely study of, again, from Fresenius on PD patients was trying to predict who might get peritonitis based on a set of data. And there is no statistics yet, but what they actually did, using a piece of AI to look at all sorts of information about the patient, some of which was just time since you started PD and things like that, it's just allocated patients into 3 risk groups. So it thought you were high risk or medium risk, and if you were high risk, a nurse went to visit you to see what you were doing, that you might get peritonitis, and if you're medium risk, you had a phone call. Okay? And they have so far shown decreasing trends of peritonitis, but this study has only been released in preliminary form. I can give you no numbers on that yet, but may know much more, but that's preliminary data on predicting peritonitis in PD patients. Surely beneficial. And that example I just alluded to, I wasn't being rude to Edwin, but how do we manage EPO? We are hopeless. This is not a new topic. This is 2016. Saying, actually, can we not do better? We measure the hemoglobin, we measure the ferritin. Surely we can use some modelling to adjust the EPO dose. And you could back then. If you use a piece of AI, a piece of machine learning, you can do much better. Particularly, you get better hemoglobin, but more importantly, you avoid big fluctuations. And here's the data that's very old, 4 or 5 years old. That's an individual patient's individual hemoglobin without using AI to adjust their EPO, and that's when you start using AI. You avoid massive fluctuations. The AI can learn better how to respond to changing hemoglobin trends. So why on earth aren't we all using this in all our units? And in terms of big data, you'll all have seen this a few months ago. This was about detecting acute kidney injury using routinely collected data in hospitals. This didn't save lives, but it speeded up the time to diagnosis of acute kidney injury by on average a day to 2 days. And that it might save lives, but that's acute, so we won't talk about that. And then this last thing was about a very nice piece of software that tried to smooth transition. We all know that one of the problems of getting people transplanted and onto dialysis in a timely fashion is just organisational complexity. And this piece of AI software attempted to just make that better. So it's a program that I assisted at MDT in identifying patients with GFRs heading down to 10 to make sure that everything was happening. Did they have a fistula formed? Had they had discussions about transplantational dialysis? It prompted the team to get on with things. Okay? But it did that by looking at monthly data, and they showed they increased preemptive transplantation rates from 2.5% to 12.5%. That is a fantastic outcome. by using a bit of computing program to use all that data we collect and chivvy the dietitian and the nurse and the doctor to get on with doing things. And they did all sorts of other benefits and more home dialysis in New York than had been achieved elsewhere. These are fantastic outcomes, aren't they? Last two, sepsis. This was published from here, Imperial, a few months ago. So they fed all the data from the ITUs across a number of centres into it, and they said, can a computer learn to recognise in septic patients whether they'll benefit from being given more fluids or being given inotropes? Adrenaline or adrenaline, epinephrine or epinephrine. And they found that, lo and behold, a computer program could do that and do it better in terms of saving lives than the doctors. So the AI could learn when it was better to give an inotrope or give fluids in a septic patient for patients to live. So, last two things, speech recognition really. So we're not quite there yet, but I do think this will save a lot of time. You all use it currently, if you've got an Alexa or a Google or a Siri. But we're not yet using it in healthcare, but I suspect that's going to come pretty quickly. Because at the moment we're a bit worried about error rates, but speech recognition will improve, so it will save time. We are all faster at talking, perhaps especially me, than at writing. So that will enhance the amount of time you can save. And more importantly, how you talk can be interpreted by AI. So across London, IAPT teams who are supporting psychological intervention use a bot, so a piece of AI, you talk into your phone to ask, I want help, I think I'm more depressed, but it doesn't just say, I'll sort out an appointment. It interprets your speech pattern to identify whether it really thinks you are more depressed or less depressed. And it is quite reliable at segregating people into more or less. So how to prioritise. It isn't saying, yes, you're mad, you're not mad, but it's helping prioritisation. And it's turned out that you can do that from keystrokes as well, how fast people type and phone type. So it's not just the speech, and that will come in very quickly. This is all saving time we can release for other things. So the last example really I think I was going to give was about diet. So at the moment, this is what we say to our patients. We give them all the same bloody dietary advice. If potassium's a bit high, we tell them to eat low potassium foods. If their phosphate's high, we tell them to eat low phosphate foods. But basically, we tell more or less the same thing to everybody, but we do recognise that if they're from India, we need to know a bit about Indian foods and spices and foods, and if they're white from Watford, we need to know about Watford food. So we recognise a little bit that our ethnic background makes a difference. But we don't do much more. So why do all diets fail? Because that's what happens in the world. Telling everybody to eat less calories is not the right answer. So there's fantastic data now out of Israel initially, the Viking Institute, where they looked at, which has been well publicised, they looked at the combination of your genomics, your personal genetic DNA, your gut microbiome, so a stool sample and an analysis of your gut bacteria, and that can predict how fast you absorb food nutrients, particularly glucose, and you can adjust the diet for an individual which will affect how well and how rapidly they absorb various foods. And that's now released, so the academic institute have licensed this, and so you buy into this, but it's by giving the company a stool sample, a saliva sample, they will predict a personalised diet for you that will, in this case, allow you potentially to lose weight or improve glycemic control if you're diabetic. This clearly would work in renal patients, wouldn't it? How can we improve an individual's diet with more information about it? Only AI can do that. It's available all the time. You don't have to wake up a grumpy radiologist at 3 in the morning and shout to you because you are asking them to interpret a CT scan. It's there all the time. Okay? And you're all using it. People get, your mobile phones are full of it, and you're perfectly happy to let Facebook do all sorts of stuff for you. It's using AI. When you switch on Netflix and it says, please watch this, you'll like it, that's AI. You may not like it, but it's working at some level. So we are using it now, it's there. This is just where things are going technologically, a whole range of things that are going to improve, and AI is in all of it. Speech language, AI image analysis, robotics, I've talked about predictive analysis. AI is going to transform our dialysis patients' lives. But how about your lives? There you are. There's you. Someone, a dialysis nurse. Currently you're spending 4 hours putting patients on and off on each dialysis shift, hours reviewing the results that you really don't know what you're reviewing because we don't know what to do with it all. You never get information from the GP and the community team, and you just react when your patients have a problem. But this is you in 10 years. You save a bit of time because you don't need to write lots of notes. This speech recognition will save you time, beginning and end of dialysis. But you will use AI that has given you an analysis, and you will, with the patient, work out what they should do with an analysis that's been given to you of that biochemistry. Okay, the patient will be wearing one of those watches, and you can look at their potassium trends over time and do what you want about it. You've got time and you love the technology, and you'll be with your colleagues working out what you can do next, and you'll be much happier. So remember Maria, she was the dialysis patient you were trying to improve her life. I'm just trying to persuade you that with all those things, you are definitely going to improve her life by using AI.
Okay, from the Borough of Ealing, weighing in at 72.3 kilos, we now have Damien Ashby. Over to you,
Did this work?
No.
I'm not daunted. Neither am I as excited as Jeremy. Don't get me wrong, I think AI is quite cool. The stories, the fancy gizmos, I get blown away by some of the things it can do. But I think ultimately it's going to disappoint. I definitely think there are better ways to determine someone's gender than looking at their retinal scan. Advice I will pass on to my teenage boys. But I'm going to argue that AI is going to disappoint us, and my argument's going to stem from 3 things. But first of all, as usual, I'm going to give you a little story. This one's about me. You always remember your first... Now, there are a lot of ways of finishing this sentence, aren't there? Your first paycheck, my first car. I love my first car. Your first kiss, you might remember. This one has a more mundane explanation. I really remember my first dishwasher. It was such a seminal event in my life, seriously. We'd been married a few years, we'd already got a small child, life was hard, 2 careers, trying to start at the beginning when you're only very young in your career, you haven't got that much time, you certainly had no money. I really, really wanted a dishwasher. It was going to be the thing that saved all my time and made life so much better for me. And it kind of did, but ultimately it disappointed, and it disappointed on 3 levels. It looked like this, actually. It was one of those desktop ones that sits on top of the counter and isn't plumbed in properly. It disappointed in terms of philosophy, because ultimately the dishwasher didn't really care about me. It didn't understand the kitchen, and it wasn't trying to do things by understanding. It wasn't intelligent. Number 2 is it disappointed me in practical terms, because in practical terms, you had to actually put things in the dishwasher to get them clean. It didn't pick up the stuff from the sitting room. I found I still had to go to Tesco's and buy stuff. It was so disappointed. I was expecting this kitchen assistant, and it was not bad. And lastly, I was disappointed because of the politics, because ultimately, the dishwasher company, they only wanted my money, nothing else. They didn't really want to help me. So what do we think of? The problem was one of expectation and delivery. So what is our expectation when we think of artificial intelligence? If you Google it and look at images, you get things like this. They're really cool pictures. This is, I've decided, the standard international symbol for geeky intelligence is this sort of dot diagram, all spidery, with all these weird pictures in it. In fact, it looks very much like this diagram that you get. Geeky intelligence in the NHS. But like Jeremy, I went through a number of films. Some of them overlap, you might see. And artificial intelligence appears in a lot of, and that's what we expect of it, what we see in popular culture, obviously, and mostly it's all controlling, like it is in Tron. Sometimes it's kind of quite endearing, like it is in Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner. Sometimes it's quite sinister, like it is in 2001 Space Odyssey with Hal. The famous line is, open the pay doors, Hal. No, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that. Very scary. Of course, AI is frequently very determined in its goal, sometimes evil. AI is undeniably logical. Occasionally, AI is stunningly beautiful. And just rarely, AI has an appreciation of irony. But it doesn't deliver in terms of delivery. This is my Lego scale of awesomeness. And how is AI going to deliver? How are we going to feel that AI is delivered in the future? Again, I'm going to turn to some films. Is it going to be like this one? I can't remember the name of this film, but there were these guys and they were running around and they had to get these stones and they were really important. And the kids were lapping it up and eating their popcorn. And I was thinking, I bet you when they find these stones, they're going to be a real disappointment. But I was wrong. The stones were amazing. This guy, he got all 5 of them and he won. It was brilliant. The stones definitely delivered. These stones were a game changer. And we've seen game changers in dialysis before, haven't we? Perhaps it's a bit too generous, but the small little dialysis machines that we have that we send people home with, they're not exactly infinity stones, but they are game-changing in our world. There was this other film. These guys wanted to see this clever guy who went by the name of Oz. Disappointing name for a clever guy. Anyway, they went there. When they finally got to see him, he seemed really impressive, had a big booming voice and a big face that sort of hung in the sky, until the dog pulls back the curtain, and it turns out that he's just a man with levers and a loudspeaker and a projector. Very disappointing. This was a cheap trick. Is AI going to turn out to be a cheap trick? Or is it going to be somewhere in the middle? This film, there were these guys and they had this spaceship and it was really big and it looked like the moon and it had this laser on the side and it could destroy a whole planet. And there was this other guy who was kind of evil and wore a mask and he said, "Don't be too proud of this technological terror that you have created. The ability to destroy a planet is nothing compared to the Force." And it turned out he was right. He was right, because this thing got blown up at the end. They put a little bomb down the exhaust pipe and it just blew up. This one turned out to be kind of quite cool, but it was a limited tool. And I think that's where AI is going to come in. We're going to say, okay, that's kind of quite cool, it does some jazzy stuff, but it's going to be a limited tool. So there are 3 sort of things that AI does, and Jeremy's already alluded to that, so I'll perhaps be a little bit brief about this. AI, it does quite a lot of what it does is sort of natural language processing, working out how we can communicate. So taking speech and extracting some data out of it, and sometimes turning some data back into some speech so that you can kind of communicate. And that's how sort of chatbots and things like that work. And AI is quite often machine learning of patterns, pattern recognition, this kind of thing, looking at cervical smears and working out which women have got to get called back and that kind of thing. And sometimes AI is another kind of machine learning where it does a sort of trial and error thing, where it runs something and just tries it, and then it keeps doing different iterations until it works out what to do. For example, this game you might remember if you're old enough was the Atari's Breakout game, where you've got the slidey thing and you've got to bounce the ball around and it keeps knocking bricks out of the wall. And AI, at first, it just misses it all, and the ball lands and the game's over. And after a while it works out that if the ball's coming down, it's got to go to the side and bounce the ball back up. And after playing it about 1,000 times, it works out that the best strategy is to puncture a hole on the left-hand side, and then you get the ball behind, and then it bounces around up here, destroying the wall really quickly. Another thing that AI does, my brother showed me these. This is AI learning how to run. It gets not taught how to walk or run, it just gets taught the anatomy of this robot and what it can do. And it gets taught the laws of physics. And then it has to work out by trying to run and seeing how long it takes it. And to start with, it keeps falling over all the time. And after a little while, it's managing to run and fall over not so often. Often it kind of flails its arms around, not quite knowing what to do with it. Funnily enough, it looks exactly like my brother does when he runs. And then eventually it learns to run over obstacles and terrains that are moving around. It's certainly very cool. It learns to do its stuff. But AI for medical purposes mostly is a form of pattern recognition. Not like this one. This is at the top of this graph, you see the computer has interpreted this wrongly. It says it's sinus tachycardia with second-degree AV block, which it's not. But this isn't AI. This is the computer using a model that it's given to interpret the T waves and stuff like that. That's a given model. It knows the shape of things, how big all the waves ought to be, and it knows a few other things like if those bits go up, then you might be having a heart attack. That's not how AI works. It works not by being given the model and working out the output. AI works, as you know, by being given the output and working out what the model is. As Jeremy said, what you do is say, give it a stack of ECGs and tell it which ones are a heart attack and which ones are okay. And then it goes through them. And to start with, it might think, okay, the heart attacks are all the ones with this white band at the top. But it's only got to go through about 10 ECGs before it works out it's nothing to do with that. When it's gone through about 50 ECGs, it knows it's got something to do with the black squiggles. And when it's gone through 1,000 ECGs, it'll probably know about ST elevation. And when it's gone through 20,000 ECGs, it'll probably know a lot of subtle stuff that we didn't even pick up beforehand. So it can be quite cool. So my 3 objections to AI, or my 3 criticisms, problems with it. The first one's philosophical. And this is a picture of a thought experiment by philosopher John Searle. You'll remember that there was this, Alan Turing came up with the Turing test, this idea that you couldn't really define what intelligence was. And so to define intelligence, you said that if a computer could simulate intelligence enough so that you couldn't tell the difference, it passed the Turing test and it must be intelligent. Of course, that was the 1940s. In the 1980s, John Searle said, no, that can't be right. It's not enough to simulate intelligence. That's not the same as being intelligent. He said, look, if you imagine a computer, and the computer's being run in China, maybe a Chinese chatbot or something like that, he said, and 2 guys are having a conversation with each other through it, or somebody's chatting to a computer. He said, you could imagine that I was in a room, enclosed, getting these signals written in Chinese, and just using a rule book to work out how I'm going to turn the signals that come in on one side into signals that go out on the other side. He said I could be performing exactly the functions that AI is performing. It would simulate it and it would look like it. But he said I would have no understanding. He said I do not speak Chinese and I would not know what was going on. He said AI is like that. Of course, the other guys say, well, maybe that's what intelligence is like. Maybe all intelligence is just simulation, but that also can't be true. If you think that it's intelligent just because it's simulating it, then other things which simulate intelligence or make decisions, also you'd have to say that they have understanding too. Does a thermostat have beliefs? You don't believe that my thermostat has beliefs. You don't believe that a heat-seeking missile has ambition. And you certainly don't believe that a smoke detector has concern for my safety. And that problem with the philosophy of it not understanding means it leads it to sometimes cheat. And cheating, don't worry, that's not a bad thing. The cheating is a good thing. That's part of what makes it okay, because the cheating means that it doesn't have any preconception about what information it should and shouldn't be using. AI can work out, by looking at something like a passport photo, what is the ethnicity of the person in the photograph, and it can do that reliably, but if you let it, as they did to start with in this program, what it actually focuses on is people's shirts and people's clothing, because it finds that that's much more reliable. And if you don't know what it's focusing on, and you haven't tried it without that cue there, you'll find that it's getting it wrong. So AI can often then be very non-specific. It's not focusing on the things you think it's doing. And it'll do the same with X-rays. It'll decide that a person's sick, not based on what the X-ray looks like, but it'll look at the clues, won't it? It'll say, oh, well, there's an ET tube, and there's ECG drops, and that makes somebody more sick than somebody that doesn't have those features. That then won't work in any setting that's outside of that. That'll be then very context-specific. And there are some things, of course, that AI is fantastically bad at doing. It doesn't take most of us 2 seconds to work out what's going on in this picture. But when you ask AI to do the same thing, because it doesn't have that greater, wider context, it finds this task extraordinarily hard. These are some of the options that AI can come up with in this. I love them, they're brilliant. I specifically like this one. The vase exploded, attracting a child and a cat. The child put on the hat to protect him from future explosions. This one, the cat was mummified in the vase, but arose when the kid touched it with a magic rope. Some things that AI can be fantastically bad at. And that's because it doesn't really have understanding, it's only simply simulating understanding. So that's politics, that's philosophy. That's a little bit like my dishwasher that doesn't really want to help me. It doesn't really know what it's doing or have any understanding. The second thing is the practicality. Now, Jeremy talks a lot about AI and prediction, and that is kind of quite cool, and I do like it. But the trouble with prediction is that the trouble with even clever prediction is that it lures you into thinking that everything's predictable. And actually, not everything is predictable. Lots of things aren't. In particular, when you're making a prediction, and particularly the way AI does it, it's basing it on a model. The trouble with a model is that the real world is always bigger than the model, which means there's always going to be things outside of the model that affect your prediction. Think of the stock exchange, for example, which is notoriously unpredictable. This is the Dow Jones Index for the last 80 years or something, not the last 80 years, it's a little bit old, this data. And this looks at a day of trading and looks at whether the index has gone up by a few percent or down by a few percent and gives you the entire distribution. Now, if you were trying to model that, you'd say, okay, this looks like a normal distribution. And you'd look at the standard deviation and it looks like it's about 1.6% or something like that. And so you'd think, okay, well, I should have 90% of the data within 2 standard deviations, which means that if I'm, looking at standard deviations spreading out to the side and how often I should get beyond certain standard deviations, it means that if you're trading 5 days a week, you should get out to this point once every 3 months. You should get out to this point once every 5 years. These numbers get big pretty quickly. You should get out to 4 standard deviations only every 200 years. You should get out to 5 standard deviations only every 20,000 years. If you're looking at 7 standard deviations, you'd have to be trading since the Earth was formed in order to get out that far. And yet, this is where we come to in the Great Depression. Of course, it looks like you have good days, but that's only because you've gone down so much one day and gone up so much the other day. And when you look at Black Monday, that's 12 standard deviations out. And this very visibly illustrates the problem of things coming from outside of your model. Really bad things happen because they frequently come from outside of your model, and when you're trying to predict them from a model, however clever you are, you're going to be spectacularly wrong sometimes. This was the thesis of the book, The Black Swan, by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, which he published in about 2004, but of course this was known way before that. This was an essential element of, say, folk wisdom. I like the song Sunscreen by Baz Luhrmann, and that encapsulates some of this folk wisdom. The song was based on a fictitious commencement address supposed to be given by Kurt Vonnegut, although it was misattributed. It was actually written by a Chicago Tribune columnist called Mary Schmitz in about 1997. And it's interesting because it was one of the first pieces of sort of pop culture to become viral in the very early days of the internet. But the song begins, or the piece of advice begins, "Ladies and gentlemen of the class of '99, if I could offer you only one piece of advice, it would be sunscreen. The long-term benefits of sunscreen have been proved by scientists, whereas the rest of this advice has no basis more important than my own meandering experience." And he goes on to give a lot of advice in it, as it were, to young sort of university graduates. And partway through, he says, "Don't worry about the future, or worry but know that worrying is about as useful as trying to solve an algebra problem by chewing bubblegum. The real troubles in your life are apt to be things that never crossed your worried mind, the kind that blindsides you at 4 p.m. on some idle Tuesday." This is saying exactly the same thing. The real things that are going to bother you are actually going to be things that you had never thought of. They came from outside of your model. They weren't things that you ever predicted that could happen to you. This is the philosophy of shit happens, and shit will happen to you, and you won't have predicted it, however clever is your AI. So, like my dishwasher, there are practical problems with AI. But the last thing, and possibly the most important, is politics, which we didn't touch on at all. And that's the way in which AI is used, or maybe not so much the way in which AI is used, but the way in which AI is presented as being used. I found this company on the internet. I got into it because of an email that Edwina sent me. I'll come to that in a sec. Babylon is a new company that's getting into the healthcare market, and it says on their website that they're helping to solve an increasing range of healthcare challenges with artificial intelligence. And look, you will recognise the international symbol for geeky cleverness that is involved. They're the developers of the NHS GP at Hand app. And you may have seen this advertised on the tube, a sort of thing which is a platform that lets you on your mobile phone have a conversation with a GP and then maybe arrange to go and see them afterwards. One of their key assets that they talk about on their website is their symptom sorter. It's a piece of AI, apparently, that is able to go through your symptoms. You interact with it, and you tell it you've got a headache, and it says, "Oh, is the headache starting suddenly? And have you had it for a long time? And is it worse in the mornings?" And stuff like that. And it takes you through a sort of algorithm that sorts out your symptoms and works out whether it's something that you can just take some paracetamol for and go to bed, or whether you ought to see your GP in a couple of weeks, or whether you ought to phone an ambulance right now. And they've kind of evaluated it, because they ran it as in a couple of counties as the NHS 111 service to see how it performed and compared to the original NHS 111 service. However, the only way in which it's been evaluated is in terms of the advice that it gives. They say that it makes more people it directs more people towards self-management, and therefore it's a success. But you and I know that that's not necessarily a success. A success depends on whether it was right or not, whether people lived or died, not on this. You also might imagine that since they're collecting all this data and doing this very cool thing, that they're producing quite a lot of research output. But in fact, when you type Babylon Health into PubMed, you get one hit. It's just a review article about a narrative review of current applications of clinical decision support in infectious diseases. One hit, that's all. There's nothing else on PubMed. It's PubMed absent. When you look on the website again, a lot of the data focuses on the money that's going to be saved. Now, Edwina sent me this email that tells you about one instance when the app got it wrong. Well, that's okay, because like Jeremy said, real people get stuff wrong as well. I don't mind about the app getting it wrong once or twice, but underneath the quote about the at getting the heart attack wrong was a picture of this guy. And it reminded me that he really likes Babylon and this AI use. And when you see the Secretary of State for Health really strongly endorsing something, you've got to be suspicious. So CEO Ali Parsa of Babylon previously, it's not coming up. It's not coming up. He previously was the CEO of Circle Health. Circle Health was the company which, for 3 years, ran Hinchinbrook Hospital, the first private company to get a contract to run an entire hospital. They did this in 2011-12. They started with the very bold claim that over a 10-year period that they were going to run the hospital for, they were going to save 300 million quid. A lot of money. They weren't shy about stating what they were going to achieve. And they said they were going to run it for 10 years, but they had a get-out clause that if they consistently lost money and they got down to a negative of 5 million, they'd be allowed out early. And in fact, they were allowed out early at 3 years because they achieved their negative deficit of 5 years. In other words, they lost 5 million, cost which they had to bear, and got out at 3 years. It was then rated as inadequate by the CQC, and of course, and they're no longer part of it. So it was, well, if not a disaster, certainly not a success, before moving on to other things, which makes you go back to Babylon, which says, hello, how can I help you? They also had very lofty ambitions. They're not shy, are they? Babylon's mission is to put an accessible and affordable health service in the hands of every person on the earth. Not just Catford, not just the UK. They've got some slick marketing. Notice the colour of the shirt and the glasses matching the colour scheme of the website. Very clever. Notice the AI and the symptom checker, but I don't think that's what's really going on. What's really going on is, I want to register as an NHS patient. In order to use the service, you have to give up your own GP, and you have to make Babylon your GP. That's actually what you have to do. They actually are positioning themselves as a company which aims to be the infrastructure through which we talk to and make appointments to see our GPs. They want to be a little middleman of our GP services, the glue holding it together. They make a lot of noise about the AI part of this because that distracts you. So AI in this case is being used as the kind of glossy cover and front for a company which has got very mundane and ordinary business ambitions. So what has AI done for us so far? Jeremy talks a lot about things that AI is going to do for us. Now, if AI is going to do a lot of things for us, you would imagine it might have just a little bit started to do some of that already. When you PubMed terms like artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, that sort of thing, you get certainly an impressive, over the years, increase in the number of hits. And when you incorporate dialysis into that terminology as well, you get the red bars. They're already in there. They're just very low at the bottom there. You get something like 10,000 in the most recent year hits for artificial intelligence overall, and 77,000 overall. But in all of this 50-year time span, if you put dialysis into the search heading as well, you only get 96 hits. Not a very big literature that we have so far. In fact, there was a conference late last year. This chap, I've forgotten his name, I keep forgetting his name, Miguel Huedo, I think he is, Spanish chap, who's here talking at the second international conference on AI and dialysis. This should be where we find it all. And he says, he encapsulates the current experiences with AI for dialysis. And it's not very impressive. Some risk algorithms that are supposed to work out who's going to get CKD and end-stage renal failure, some prediction models to work out admission rates and things, something to do with patient communication with the dialysis unit, and then maybe anemia and individualized medication adjustment. And that piqued my interest, so I thought I'd look a little bit more specifically at anemia and what's happened there. And actually you can find about 10 PubMed articles on AI being used to treat anemia in dialysis patients. And the pinnacle is this study in KI published 2016 by these guys. They've used an AI system that's learnt how to predict someone's hemoglobin based on these parameters. There's about 20 or so parameters there that includes albumin, phosphate, leukocytes, MCV, calcium, potassium, cation V, all sorts of things that goes into the model and helps it to predict what your hemoglobin is going to do, and then makes a suggestion about what you should do for the future. So in this trial, they looked at 750 patients on dialysis in Portugal, Spain, and Czech Republic. They did a standard protocol where they got standard of care advice, and then for 9 months they did their AI advice protocol, where the AI told the clinicians what to do each month, and the clinicians, of course, could accept or reject that advice. 61% of the time they accepted the advice, 10% of the time they rejected the advice, but look at this, 29% of the time, AI said, oh, I don't know, I can't do it, I don't have data. Couldn't give any advice. Very disappointing. Now, you're right that it makes things slightly more predictable. The blue is the control phase, the AI advice is the green, the intervention phase. This is the standard deviation of haemoglobin. You do get a slightly tighter distribution of haemoglobin with the artificial intelligence. It's slightly tighter. When you look at the outcomes over time, you see that it did reduce by about 20% or something like that. It reduced EPO doses. Somebody's never met a dialysis patient, because these are weekly doses, not monthly doses, but anyway. There's a slight reduction in haemoglobin in EPO use. And there's also an increase from 70% to 76% of the percentage of people that have got their haemoglobin within the target range. So that sounds quite nice. But there's not an improvement at the bottom end of that scale. The anemia isn't better treated. It's not that there were less people anemic, in fact slightly more. They've gone from 12% of people who are under target to 13% of people who are under target. So it hasn't made the treatment any better. If you're arguing that this system is going to make patients feel better, it won't. It's taken 12% anemic and turned it into 13% anemic instead. Even though the EPO doses have gone down, and the target apparently has got better. But that's all because the people at the top end, the ones with the high haemoglobin, we were giving more EPO than was necessary. We've managed to get rid of those from 17% down to 9%. It hasn't made anyone feel better. It's just made the doses less and the whole system a bit cheaper. That's really what this has done. This is the pinnacle of AI research in dialysis to date, and all it's done is slightly worsen the anemia treatment, but save a lot of cash. I did a little bit of this myself, not with AI, just with a 2-model protocol, which halfway through this 2-year period I changed into a 4-parameter protocol. And the doses got slightly better, not fantastic, but they've done a similar thing. We've gone from the first year using a 2-parameter protocol to the second year using a 4-parameter protocol, from 9,000 to a bit under 8,000. Not a massive change in terms of the EPO used, but we haven't done it with an increase in anemic patients. The number of anemic patients has stayed the same, or if anything, got slightly better. So what's produced by the AI paper is not much better than one can do easily by oneself, just by slightly changing the protocol. And who knows, I haven't got a fantastic protocol, there must be others that are better. So how does AI fare on my Lego scale of awesomeness? Well, I think it comes in here at limited tool, a little bit like my dishwasher, ultimately. I didn't get rid of it. I kind of liked the dishwasher well enough. It wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be, and I was disappointed, but I kept it. And over the years, I've worked out how to make the most of it. For example, it's now a little bit taller, a little bit nicer, it's got a slightly faster cycle, it doesn't make as much noise, it's probably better for the environment. But the best innovation of all is that now I have 2 of them. That's really cool, because on Mondays you take the stuff out of here and you put it into there, and then it ends up dirty. And on Monday night you wash it. And on Tuesday you take the stuff out of there and you put it into that one. And on Tuesday night you have to wash that one. And you know what? You actually find that you save space in the kitchen, because I don't need cupboards anymore. So in conclusion, I think AI is going to be quite cool, but limited. It'll turn out to disappoint. It'll turn out to disappoint on philosophy, because it doesn't really understand anything. We call it artificial intelligence. That's a misnomer because it's not intelligent. It's going to disappoint in the practicalities, because everything you try and predict will have something outside of the model that will be spectacularly disappointing. And thirdly, it's going to disappoint us on politics, because in fact, AI is often the jazzy cover of a very ordinary organisation, just like my dishwasher company, that really are only at the end of the day interested
That's great, David, thank you. So what would I say? I'd say that AI, this is based about narrow versus general. Nobody would want to say artificial intelligence is going to do what we all can do. It is absolutely, I completely agree with you, it's a tool that we're going to use. But I'm much more optimistic than you are that it's a tool that's going to be useful. The fact that it will miss the Great Depression, I'm not bothered about. For our patients, actually it's not just they've got dialysis, they've all got cardiovascular disease,